Helen and Tommy met very young in high school. It was love at first sight. After 3 years of relationship, Tommy took Helen to the altar, and the couple seemed to get along very well. At 4 months, Helen became pregnant and her first child was born. They named Michael. The child was the joy of the couple and they seemed very happy. But as time went by, Helen ended dedicating himself devotedly to his son, and in his vision, he wanted the best for his son. At first, Tommy didn't care and thought that Helen was being a devoted mother, but Tommy will be the first to realize that his wife's upbringing will end up causing great disasters in the family. Tommy, like every good doting father, wanted his son to be a man independent and who could face life and destiny with all courage and learning moral principles and life values. But Helen believed that the boy should be happy and had the right to enjoy his childhood. This ended up causing clashes and discussions between Helen and Tommy, where each had their own vision of creation. But Helen always put her vision before Tommy's and believed that her way of raising was the best. But all that would change when Michael turned 10. On an unexpected day, Michael throws a tantrum saying that he didn't want to eat vegetables, but he wanted to eat fried chicken, and he wanted to eat it in his room. At that moment, Tommy said to his son, "Michael, vegetables are good for your health, and you are in the growth phase. You must eat what we have." At that moment, Michael shouted at his father and said, "I want to eat fried chicken in my room, and I don't want to eat with you." And at that moment, Helen said, "Don't worry, my love. I'll make some fried chicken, and you can eat it in your room." The boy smiled maliciously, and Tommy, with a serious and angry look, shouted, "Enough, Michael. I'm tired of your tantrums and bad creations. You're going to eat here with us, and that's final." At that moment, Helen said to Tommy, "Calm down, Tommy. No need to yell at our son. Let the boy be happy. I know what I am doing." Tommy, in order not to create a terrible atmosphere, watched while his son manipulated his mother, and she did all of her son's whims. Tommy watched this situation. Helen was blinded by her unhealthy and toxic mother's love. The other day, when Michael is in bed and playing a video game, Tommy asks if the boy isn't going to school, and Helen said that the boy was sick and couldn't go to school. At that moment, Tommy decided to put his hand on his son's forehead and said, "He's not sick at all. He is healthy and can go to school normally." And Michael imperatively shouted, "I don't want to go to school. I want to stay here at home. Don't you understand, old man, that I don't want to go to school?" At that moment, Tommy's face turned red with indignation, and with all his fury, he slapped Michael in the face who, upon feeling the slap, screamed outrageously, and Helen at that moment shouted at Tommy, "Don't do that, Tommy. Not see that you are causing our child suffering. Our son doesn't go to school and that's it. And don't ever do that to Michael again. He's a boy, and it's normal at his age to behave like this." And Tommy responded indignantly, "Not seeing that this boy is manipulating you and making you look like an idiot, Helen. You are not raising a child, but a being out of control. Think about it, Helen." The couple was arguing, and Michael just watches the argument between Tommy and Helen. The two of them talk very badly to each other. The couple doesn't sleep together and tells Tommy to sleep on the sofa in the living room. In Helen's view, she was protecting her son from everything and everyone. The days went on, and Helen remained firm in her vision creation. Tommy had already realized that Helen was creating an evil and valueless being who would later have a terrible price. And Michael was a manipulative, naughty, and very syrupy boy. The other day, Tommy's sister named Jessie goes to visit her older brother. Tommy welcomes his younger sister with lots of love and a hug. At that moment, Michael says to his nephew, "Hello, my little boy." "Hello." And Michael mischievously said to Jessie, "Aunt Jessie, give me some money to buy sweets." And at that moment, Jessie said to her nephew, "My love, I'm really sorry. I didn't have any money." And Michael started shouting and throwing a tantrum in front of everyone. And at that moment, Helen said, "Calm down. My love, here's some money for you." The boy was happy, and in an act of rebellion, Michael pushed Jessie and ran to the room. And Tommy looked indignantly at Helen, and she said, "Don't look at me like that, Tommy." He's just a boy. That's normal at his age. At that moment, Jessie couldn't stand it and replied to her sister-in-law, "Listen, Helen, you're raising this boy in a toxic and horrible way. This will end up causing big problems in your life. And you, Tommy, he should impose himself a little more and show that he is the man of this house. You can't let your guard down like that and let your wife do whatever she wants with this boy." And at that moment, Helen retorted to her sister-in-law, "I already told you he's just a boy. That's not so much. You are all coming together to criticize my creation. I know how I should educate my son." At that moment, Tommy, tired of his wife's justifications, shouted, "That's enough, Helen. Jessie is absolutely right. This boy's behavior is out of control. You are creating a monster, an evil being completely devoid of values. This is getting worse. Too bad." Helen was completely shocked by her husband's words, and she thought it was all ridiculous, and that everyone was colluding with her vision of creation. But time passed and Helen kept focusing on Michael's mistakes and tantrums, which got worse and worse every day, and Tommy could no longer stand living in that toxic environment that became her home. But all that would change one day at school, when Michael, out of pure tantrum, kicked his teacher in the shin and ran into the courtyard in front of everyone at school. The directors called Michael's parents to draw their attention to their son. Tommy listened in astonishment to all the directors' explanations about his son. That was practically the last straw for Tommy, who said that this was already the case, going too far. Upon taking her son home and deciding to give him a punishment, Helen intervened and said, "I don't want my son to live in a hostile environment. He's just a boy, Tommy. Understand this, please." And this time, remembering his sister Jessie's words, Tommy said firmly and confidently, "Listen, Helen, if you don't put an end to it, I'm going to ask you for a divorce. Taking our son away and raising him away from you. I don't want my son to become a bad adult in the future." And Helen, amazed, said, "You can't do that. You can't separate a son from his mother. It will cause great trauma to our son. You want to leave? Go. I will raise my son alone as I believe. If you are not satisfied with my vision, get out of here now." And at that moment, Helen added, "It seems like you hate your own son. Everyone criticizes my creation. Since when is being a good mother a sin? All I do is protect you from everything and everyone. You don't understand this, Tommy." And Tommy, fed up with it, said, "I can't live like this anymore. I can't stand this anymore. I'll divorce you. From now on, just talk to me through my lawyer. Because you are ruining our son and everything you will get. It's a curse on your life. Life and destiny will still demand a lot from you for what you are doing. This is not a curse, it's destiny." Helen was amazed by Tommy's words. Even so, Helen didn't care about destroying her marriage, and Tommy divorced Helen. He decided to pay his son's pension and left the house. Tommy and Helen's marriage ended there. Helen defended her creative vision, but life would soon make her pay dearly. Tommy decided to move on with his life. He didn't abandon his son and visited on the weekends. Over time, Tommy met a new girlfriend named Marilyn. She was a widow who had a son named George. Marilyn, unlike Helen, was an exemplary mother, humble, and was aware of adult life and values in raising a child, and presented that his son Tommy, who was called George, a boy the same age as Michael. Only being older by a difference of 6 months, very different from Michael, George was a true sweetheart of a boy, very polite, with a good heart, and an obedient boy and sensitive. Tommy began to form affection for George, and the boy did everything to please Tommy and win his heart. George really wanted to have a father, and he adored Tommy. Tommy saw George as the son Michael was supposed to be. It wasn't long before Tommy and Marilyn started living together, and George gave gifts made with his own hands like toys and showed Tommy his drawings to see how he reacted. And Tommy felt touched by the affection and love expressed by George. Unlike Michael, George loves the gifts Tommy gave him, and the boy was grateful for that. And the boy felt very happy with Tommy. Very different from Helen, Marilyn wanted her son to have a father, and at no point did she censure or take away Tommy's authority to raise his son. And George lacked a father figure, as he was fatherless, and the boy decided to give his son's love for Tommy. One day, George declares himself to Tommy and says, "Mr. Tommy, would you like to be my father? I like you very much, and I believe that you can be a great man for my mother and a good father for me." Tommy, feeling touched by George's words, said, "Yes, I agree to be your father. I will love you and take great care of you, my son." And Tommy gave the boy a tight hug, who'd felt protected and welcomed. Marilyn was very happy and saw how much of a father Tommy was to his son, and lovingly said to Tommy, "Love, I'm glad to meet you. And I see that my son adores you. You could go out with my son. Take a walk with him and have fun together, and it will do you both good." And Tommy lovingly said, "You can leave my love. On the weekend, when I have time off from work, I go out with George." The couple hugged and kissed. George helped Tommy around the house when he needed to clean or do some work he needed. And Tommy, working at a forklift company in Ship Cargo Port, he supported the household for Marilyn and her stepson. And Marilyn was a housewife, and from time to time ventured into babysitting children to earn extra income. And Tommy paid attention to his new family without omitting his obligation with Michael's child support. But Tommy dedicated time and affection to George and no longer visited his son Michael, due to his son's toxic and rebellious behavior. In parallel, Helen was raising her son, and blinded by her vision of creation, she didn't realize how naughty Michael was getting and responded. At the weekend, as promised, Tommy takes George to play in the city park, and the boy seems very happy. The two have a lot of fun and play together. Tommy even buys popcorn and cotton candy, and they eat together. In this atmosphere of father and son relationship between Tommy and George, Helen furiously introduced herself to the two and shouted, "Very handsome Tommy, by paying attention to other people's children and your own child, you forgot. Besides spending money on this bastard who isn't yours at all. The Big Daddy of the Year award goes to Tommy." And at that moment, Tommy asked George to play around and went to speak to Helen in private and said indignantly to his ex-wife, "You don't need to say such nonsense in front of George. He is a boy of values and principles. This boy may not be my blood son, but he respects me and truly loves me. And I feel how much this boy gives me his love. I love this boy." Marilyn knew how to raise this boy with values and principles. "It's my money, and I spend as much as I want with George. As for Michael, you completely ruined it. No wonder Michael is naughty and talks back. Not even my pension money is valued. Well, even separately, I support Michael, just as I support and take care of George." And at that moment, Helen retorted, "And you still defend this boy who is none of yours? Even though you are paying our son's pension, you haven't visited or been present. You prefer this bastard who is not your son to your own son." And at that moment, Tommy retorted to Helen, "If I don't get Michael to spend time with me, it's because I know what a creature this boy is. It will cause fights and conflicts. And I don't want George or Marilyn to have a headache with him. I know the creature I had at home, and I know it very well. Maybe I'll do that when I have some free time, but not at Marilyn's house. I don't want Michael jumping on the living room couch or breaking Marilyn and George's things, and much less causing chaos at Marilyn's house. George is now my responsibility as well as Marilyn, without neglecting my responsibility to Michael." Helen stood there talking to Tommy about his absence in Michael's life, but Tommy knew that Helen wanted trouble. In order not to argue in front of George, Tommy picked up the boy and said in a gentle and affectionate way that the game was over. And George obediently went hand in hand with his stepfather. Helen looked grim as Tommy and George walked down the street. Arriving home, George went to his room to study, and Tommy and Marilyn made out on the sofa in the living room, and Tommy told Marilyn about the unwanted encounter with his ex in the park, and told her everything, and that they almost had a shack in the park in front of George, and preferred to leave rather than see his ex-wife humiliate his stepson. And at that moment, Marilyn said, "Love, your ex doesn't realize the damage she is causing to your son. She should take her son away from her before the worst happens, because children with this distorted upbringing from your ex end up becoming problematic adults. And your ex will still pay a very high price for allowing herself to be manipulated by this boy. And Tommy lovingly said, I should do that, but I don't want my son to be traumatized by separating from his mother, because the law is on her side. That's why I prefer to separate from her than continue living in that hell. At least you and George make me very happy, and I see that you are a balm for my life. And the couple stay talking to each other. The two were firm and secure in their relationship. 2 years into the relationship, Tommy asks Marilyn to marry him, and Marilyn accepts Tommy's proposal. The two get married in a simple ceremony. Only for close friends and relatives. Jessie, Tommy's sister, was happy that her brother had finally found a real woman with principles and values, and also accepted little George as a nephew and treated Jessie very good. A few months later, Marilyn became pregnant, and they had a daughter, who they named Elizabeth. Little Elizabeth was the joy of Tommy and Marilyn. And George was happy with the union of his mother and father from the heart. Tommy loved his daughter Elizabeth with the same intensity that he loved his stepson George, without distinction, and he decided to raise them as equals. Although Tommy missed his son Michael, he shares with his stepson and his daughter the love and principles that Helen did not share. Helen was already raising her son on a cookie-cutter basis, enduring criticism from friends and neighbors who every day made complaints about her son's bad behavior, and Helen defended her son against the complaints they made about Michael, claiming that it was all jealousy and that everyone was against her because of the way she raised her son. In fact, Helen was an incompetent and completely irresponsible mother. Everyone said that Michael would be a conflicted adult with this distorted upbringing. And Helen remained blind, believing that she was defending her son from everything and everyone. But soon life would teach a lesson that Helen would never forget. The years passed, and when Michael and George turned 21, the results appeared. Michael became a bratty, rebellious boy who, over time, began to disrespect his mother, including asking his mother for money for futile and silly things. George, with the upbringing he had with Tommy and Marilyn, was a hard-working, honest boy and a medical student who made Marilyn and Tommy proud. George respected Tommy and loved him unconditionally, and saw how Tommy was a good husband to his wife, mother, and a great father to him, his sister Elizabeth. George had a strong emotional bond with Tommy and adored the man as if he were his real father. And little Elizabeth grew in grace and beauty, being the baby of that family. Tommy was calm and at peace with his family. And in time, George graduated from medicine and invited his parents and sister to his graduation, which filled Tommy with joy. And George started working at the most important hospital in the network in his city. An unexpected day. Michael ended up getting involved with tough people and carrying out robberies in the community. On a day when Michael, with an accomplice, decided to rob a man who was walking on the street, but without knowing that the man was an off-duty police officer. After Michael committed the crime, he turns his back, and at that moment, the policeman pulls out a gun and shoots Michael. The shot ends up hitting his spine, and he can't feel his legs. Michael screams in agony, saying, "Help me. I can't feel my legs." The police officer himself called the ambulance that took Michael to the hospital. When Helen found out what happened to her son, she was desperate and cried. Only now did she see the consequences of her son's terrible upbringing. Tommy found out about what happened to Michael through George, who, ironically, was the one who treated Michael at the hospital. Both Helen and Tommy were saddened by Michael's terrible fate. In this time of distress, Marilyn, Elizabeth, and George supported Tommy. Helen, on the other hand, was alone and had no one by her side. And it was at this meeting that Helen and Tommy saw each other again after years. And Tommy indignantly said, "Here is the result of your toxic and unprincipled creation. You destroyed our son. Your super protection. It ended up becoming its own curse." At that moment, Helen, crying, replied, "I'm so sorry. I just wanted to protect my son, and I wanted him to be happy. And only now did I realize how wrong I was. Everyone warned me, and I was blind and completely lost in my vision. Now I realize that I am reaping the fruits of my choice and paying dearly for it." At this point, Marilyn got involved in the conversation, and supporting Tommy said, "That was the result of raising a worthless son. no limits and totally free. Unfortunately, I'm sorry for this young man who had to pay in the worst way, due to the incompetence of an irresponsible mother. With all respect, but being sincere and true, I feel sorry for this boy. At first, Helen felt like flying around Marilyn's neck, but soon she controlled herself and realized that her ex-husband's wife was only telling the truth. During this moment of waiting, George appeared and said to Tommy, "Daddy, this boy is fine. He is out of danger and alive, but I'm sorry to inform you, he will be paralyzed. The shot was accurate and affected the spine. He could stay like this for the rest of his life. I am really sorry, Father." At that moment, Helen screamed in despair and said, "No, not my son. Why, my God." Tommy is saddened by this news, but Tommy received support from Marilyn, Elizabeth, and George. But George, comforting Helen, said, "Calm down, Mom. I know how difficult this is, but you need to be strong and support the young person. Maybe with time and lots of treatments, he can walk again, but with difficulty or on crutches, because the consequences are inevitable in these cases." As Helen was unable to afford treatment, George decided to reach out and help Michael, out of love for Tommy, her dearest father. And out of respect for his father, he decides to help Michael. Michael, upon hearing the news, was completely devastated to learn of his condition, and in extreme arrogance, Michael said, "I can't believe I'm going to look like this. It would have been better if I had died." At that moment, Helen retorted to her son, "Enough, Michael. May he have a little humanity for once in his life. This was a result of letting you do whatever you wanted. I'm to blame for this, and you also had the chance to change and followed your path. From now on, things will change." And Michael then said to his mother, "You always let me do what I wanted. You never scolded me. Even when he brought stolen things, you never questioned. Dad was indeed right. You spoiled me. And now I'm paying for your irresponsibility." At that moment, Marilyn said to the boy, "This is not the time to wash dirty laundry and exchange accusations. Let's help you, boy, even though he doesn't deserve it. Be grateful for receiving this second chance that life and destiny gave you for some reason, and try to learn something from it. Boy, think about it." And Michael was silent and regretted what had happened in his life. Helen and Tommy were talking about the outcome of all this. And Helen said to her ex-husband, "Tommy, I apologize for being arrogant and thinking I was doing my best to protect my son from everything and everyone. I didn't realize the mistake I made. I only now realize that I got my life together. Our marriage, my happiness, and that of our son. I'm so sorry." And Tommy sadly said, "I hope you learned something from this, Helen, because I learned that you shouldn't raise consenting children. Did you see George? Although he is not my son, he is a good guy and has become a doctor and a person of character, thanks to me, and the joint education I had with Marilyn, who never took away my authority and never found lame excuses like you did to justify our son's tantrums and mischief. And I'm also doing the same with Elizabeth. Thank God. Marilyn respects me, something you never did. I just hope you learn something from this and take it into your life by not repeating the mistakes of the past." After all this time, Helen and Tommy held hands and showed solidarity in helping Michael. Tommy provided financial help with George's support so that Michael could one day walk again. And over time, Michael ended up seeing some results. It wasn't a 100% recovery, as his spine was badly damaged due to the shock he took. But he was able to walk with crutches. While Tommy visited his son and tried to console the boy, who felt increasingly unhappy and sad about the fate that life had given him. Helen ended up reaping her bill and the consequences of a creation without principles and limits. And Tommy was very happy next to Marilyn, his wife, George, his son at heart, and his daughter by blood, Elizabeth. Marilyn's daughter with Tommy, Helen's stepdaughter, George's sister, and Michael's half-sister. George and Tommy had a good relationship, even though it was not due to blood ties, but rather the love of father and son. And George's loyalty to Tommy was unwavering, just as Tommy also had this strong bond with George. And Marilyn and Elizabeth were together supporting Tommy and George like true family. Helen, on the other hand, would live with the punishment of caring for her disabled son, and regretted too late that she had not listened to the warnings that her ex-sister-in-law Jessie and her ex-husband Tommy made about the terrible education she had with her son, and paid for it. A very expensive price for that. And she regretted the lost time.